30 seconds. Okay, we will start today's Environmental and Transport Overview Scrutiny Committee. It's Thursday, the 4th of June, 2020, and it's 2 p.m. I'd like to welcome everybody, both members and public, for this live broadcast. I'll go through the normal procedures of reading the normal rules and regulations. Welcome to today's meeting of the Environment, Transport Overview and Scrutiny Committee. As usual, this meeting is being broadcast live to the public. For those not able to watch the footage live, the webcast will be available for viewing on the County Council's website after this meeting. Due to the current situation, all of the members of the committee will be joining online along with officers presenting today. Can I please ask that all officers and members remember to turn on their microphones and cameras when speaking and off when you've finished speaking. Before we begin, I'd like to go around with a roll call online and for the benefit of the recording to ask to introduce yourself. So I will go straight away. I'll follow the membership on the agenda. So David, Bill, are you there?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you, Bill. Welcome to this another historical making meeting. We did the paperless, and now we're doing a broadcast from our homes. Mr. Bolter.
Yes, I'm here.
Mr. Good to have you on board. Mr. Harrison.
Yes, here. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good to hear from you, Dan. Max Hunt, Mr. Hunt. Max. Okay, Mr. Morgan. Jonathan? Yeah, good. Thank you. Mr. Fillmore?
Present, thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Poland?
Here, Chairman.
Thank you. And Mr. Richards, Mrs. Richards? Mrs. Richards, are you there? I think you're muted. Can you unmute? I know you were there. Okay, we'll move on because we've got a long agenda to get through. Again, welcome everybody, and again, quite a historical moment. So we'll go through the agenda as presented and delivered by paperless means to you all. I've got to say that. So we've got item 1, minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of March, which was the last one we did in physical presence. I propose that these minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of March 2020 are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Do you all agree?
Yes.
Yes, all agree.
Yes, with the exception of that point I raised this morning of the minor error.
And we'll do that. I think, as you suggested, David, there's no point in bringing it up now, but we have them already. I think you'll find they will be adjusted. It's just a name thing at a time, yeah? Happy with that?
Thank you.
Thank you. So we're all in agreement. Point 2, question time. No questions have been received. Item 3, questions asked by members under the standing order. No questions. Item 4, to advise of any items which the chairman has decided to take as urgent elsewhere on the agenda. There are no urgent items. 5, declaration of interest in respect of items in this agenda. Les, could you bring your point up, which I thought was in the briefing important?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It relates to public transport. My wife is employed by the LEA and would be at the other end of transport for the send part of our demographics. So it's only a personal interest. Mo's heard this before. rather than a pecuniary or non-pecuniary. So for me, it's just a personal interest.
I think we'd be fine. That was picked up prior. I've got Officer Katui here, and I think it's fine. It is a personal. I think he can carry on. Is that correct? Yeah, you're fine. So, but I do appreciate for being transparent and bringing that up. We'll move on to the next agenda item. Number 6, declaration of the party whip. In accordance with the overview scrutiny procedure rule, which is 16. Do any members wish to declare the party whip? We haven't had any presentation to that. Presentations under petitions under Standing Order 55. There's no petitions. Before we move on to consider the substantive items on this agenda today, as a reminder, can I please ask members to allow officers to present their full report before seeking to ask questions? Unless we can manage that. I think we're getting good at this. As we are all joining online to ensure everyone has an opportunity to speak, I propose once the officers have finished presenting the item, to first ask the lead member for comment if they are in attendance. If you wish to ask a question, then please indicate via instant message. I will then open up for questions in order of messages received in the chat. Once called, please unmute your microphone and switch to your camera on. And to be sure everyone has their say before I wrap up the discussion, I will ask if any members have anything further to add. Is that all clear? I guess that's okay. Silence means yes, I guess. Okay, we go on now to the first major item on the agenda, which is item 8, and it's the coronavirus COVID-19 update. We now move then to, it's on your page 1120 of your pack agenda. Anne, could you please now start the presentation? Much appreciated. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair. Thank you. Yes, this report covers the implications that COVID-19's had for the Environment and Transport Department and our response to that. It also looks forward in terms of what we're doing in some of those service areas and covers the financial implications. If I take the financial implications first, it is still too early to say in detail the full implications of that. However, the key areas where we will see an impact are due to loss of income for those services that we normally would see an income in for, increased cost of delivering services, and our inability to deliver savings under the MTFS. Key areas that we've seen cost increase to date have included waste disposal, as we see more household waste coming through the system as people are contained to home, etc. So that's an added increase to us. We've also seen a cost increase of delivering services because of social distance requirements and what that's entailed us to do in order to safely have staff carrying out those activities. There's also, and there will also be, but we still don't know the finer detail of this yet, an impact in terms of our capital programme as schemes are delayed or put in hold, and inevitably there's additional costs in relation to that. We don't yet know the impacts of the wider economy, and we're fully aware that we're going to see a much wider economic impact because of COVID and the knock-on effects of that. And for our area, it'll be things like contract inflation. When we go out to tender for schemes in future, what kind of costs are we going to see with those tender returns, etc. So there's a whole lot of information we don't yet have. Unfortunately, most cases it means cost increases for the department. If I move on a bit, we have had some positive news in terms of funding. The Department for Transport has rolled together a number of highway maintenance funding streams into one fund that they've called the Transport Infrastructure Investment Fund. That contains streams of highway maintenance funding that we are allocated on an annual basis. But they've also added in additional funds that are over and above that. So for this year, for instance, in addition to the annual awards we would get and we're aware of, we've had additional money for pothole funding and also challenge funding. Challenge funding is usually a competitive bid and we were in the process of bidding for that. But because of the COVID situation, the government has said we're just going to allocate it pro rata on a formula basis across the country. Those two streams, pothole funding and challenge funding, we have been awarded an extra £10.2 million for this financial year for our highways maintenance works. What we obviously very welcome news. What we are now doing is reassessing our programme for the current year to take into account what we can no longer deliver for reasons of, say, social distancing, etc. What's costing us more, and therefore, you know, we may not be able to deliver full programmes, as well as revise priorities, just given where we are at the moment. And we'll be producing a refreshed programme of what we will be delivering in terms of highway maintenance for this financial year. We're also undertaking a review of our capital programme. That's our major schemes there, as part of our wider corporate financial work to understand what will be affordable in future. So not the schemes that are on site now, obviously, but the ones that will be coming up over the next 2, 3, 4 years. What will they cost? Are they affordable? How does that fit within the council's wider financial challenges? So that's another piece of ongoing financial related work because of COVID. If we move on to the services themselves then, in terms of highways and our highways work and the impact and a response to that, with the very early days of lockdown, we initially moved to critical services only. So that's the safety, urgent, defect type services. However, gradually over time, services have been stood up as government guidance has come out to clarify situations and provide guidance, particularly around social distancing and safe operation. We've continued to do that. The services that are not operational are set out in Appendix A. However, I would very much caveat that because we are, you know, in a fast-changing environment, and some of that, since this report has been written, some of that has actually changed. For instance, school transport and school crossing patrols, which are gradually being stood up there. Another one I would update on is grass cutting. Our urban grass cutting started 4 to 6 weeks late. You know, normally we would start end of March, beginning of April, depending on the weather and, you know, how much grass growth there's been. We didn't start that till the beginning of May. The first round of across the county will complete by mid next week, and we're now able then to make live our interactive web map on grass cutting, and that will should be live on the website in the next few days, which will inform residents of their future cut dates. So some things are getting back to more of what we would have expected as normal for the highways activities. If I move on to what we're calling restarting, or what government's calling restarting local transport, that's, you know, how we are supporting local economies starting up and people moving around, beginning to move around more as restrictions are eased. We've had guidance since writing the report. We've had further guidance from DfT, and under their emergency active travel fund, which is a total of 250 million out of a wider 2 billion pot that was announced in the budget earlier this year. The first tranche of that emergency active travel fund is 45 million nationally, and that's for temporary facilities on main public transport corridors to very much support the government's message of encouraging walking and cycling, locking in the benefits of some of the activity and behaviours we've seen during lockdown, discouraging the use of bus because of obvious challenges in terms of social distancing, and where that's not feasible, supporting, you know, supporting movement by car. Now that fund is very much about us implementing on those busy corridors where we would have wanted to see, or we would have normally seen a lot of movement by public transport, facilitating walking and cycling. So it is about temporary measures, pop-up cycle lanes, widening of footways, that kind of thing that will help encourage and support that type of movement. So we provisionally, out of that 45 million, been allocated 300,000 of that, but we are required to submit bids for that, so it's not straight allocation, here's your money and go and do what you want. We've got to submit the proposals for that, and they need to be put in by tomorrow. So we've been very busy working up these proposals on the types of measures that we think would be helpful in those locations. We've also had notification of a second tranche under that funding, and provisionally our allocation would be 1.2 up to 1.2 million. So anything that proposals that are coming forward or schemes we feel are valuable but aren't able to be included in the first tranche, we very much look to build on that and put it through in that second tranche of funding. This is linked, however, to work that's going on through the local resilience forum for the town centres group with district colleagues, and that's looking at measures supporting the reopening of the town centres and the public realm areas there. Now, there's a crossover between the business need, what districts would want to do in those areas, and what we as highways would want to do to support that. So we're working with that, and there's funding that's been allocated from MHCLG for that work. Final strand in terms of that supporting, as people are become more are moving around more after restrictions, as restrictions eased, is we have allocated 1 million of our own funding that was in a highways funding for community concerns to those smaller communities, because very much at the moment the funding available from government is aimed at town centres, main public transport corridors, but obviously, and I'm sure you'll appreciate, that a lot of our smaller communities, villages, would want to see measures to help them in dealing with social distancing around, say, for instance, local shops, etc. So we are putting in process a mechanism to support where there's requests and need for such measures, that we could fund those and work with local communities and local members to provide those facilities to assist those communities in that. So as you'll appreciate, there's a lot of work going on in that area to support safe movement as we begin to see more activity out and about there. If I move on to public and school transport, during the pandemic, we've continued to provide transport for the children of key workers and vulnerable children. However, those numbers have been very low. You're all very well aware that primary schools have started with reception year 1 and year 6 pupils. And that started from the beginning of this week. However, not all schools were starting then. Some were doing it on slightly staggered dates. We are providing transport there. Due to difficulties of social distancing, we are encouraging those eligible for that transport to take up a mileage allowance, so that parents, where they're able, can take their child to school themselves. However, we will provide transport if that's not feasible. To date, demand has been very low, as parents are either deciding not to send their children or are opting to take their children themselves. And the work of that team there is very much about gearing up to provide for years 10 and 12, which are being invited back to school from the 15th of June, but again, very much on a staggered basis. And beyond that, thinking about how we manage the realities of September and the likelihood of schools being open for all children, which will be challenging for us. But we're beginning that work to look at the various options and how that could be facilitated. In terms of public transport, patronage has been significantly reduced. I'm sure that won't be a shock to you. And operators for both commercial and subsidised services have, as a result, significantly reduced the services on the ground. In line with government guidance, however, during that period, we have continued to pay the operators who, we had on contract for those subsidised services, because that was very much the government's line. Due to the impact of COVID, we've had to put on hold our public transport policy and strategy work, a review of those subsidised services, and there is a report later on the agenda that will go into that in a bit more detail. The only other update I would provide to the information in Appendix A in terms of the services that are stopped at the moment is Park and Ride service has actually started again from the 1st of June, albeit it's just operating from the Enderby site in Maynills Gorse, as the Bristol site is currently being used as a government testing site. And the only other information on that one is our school crossing patrol service is being stood up gradually in line with demand from schools and our availability of staff. If I move on to waste, I'm sure the committee is aware we did close down our recycling and household waste centres when lockdown first came about, due to the level of activity we had on it, the amount of visitors we saw on the sites and the inability to do any kind of social distancing because of that. We have worked very hard and we've reopened 7 of those sites. They reopened on the 18th of May with the new online booking system. The first day of that saw 2 of the sites had fairly long queues, but we looked at refining the operations on those individual sites, and we've largely addressed that issue. We've now stood down the traffic management we had at 5 sites, and there's just 2 that have got traffic management at different times, either during the week or the weekend, because of localised requirements. So the system is settling down well, and in most days I am told, particularly weekdays, there are spaces available for people to book. The service is now looking to consider when we can reopen other sites and reintroduce additional waste streams, but that very much depends on staff availability and the challenges of operating social distancing within the confines of those sites. So we will keep members updated, but it is a fairly challenging ask at the moment.
Is that it then?
Just final points on staff. One last thing, just on the staff situation overall for the department, the vast majority of our office-based staff are now working at home, but as a summary, approximately 70% of staff are working in total at the department. 28% are not working. Now that's either due to their shielding or their service isn't operational, it's stood down at the moment. But again, I'm sure you'll have picked up as we move forward, literally week by week that changes as services are stood up again. I'll finish there. Hope that's been helpful.
No, thank you, Anne. It was in depth and again precise. I always look forward to her reports. Let's move on to Trevor. Trevor Pendleton is our lead member, and I just thought I'd give him the opportunity to make some comments, or if he wishes to, on some of Anne's points. Over to you, Trevor.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon, everyone. It's been, to say the least, challenging. I'm now pushing new ENT lead member. I've got to say that in looking at the new normal, the department's done extremely well with sorting out the waste disposal, bearing in mind that districts and boroughs are responsible for collecting 80% of it, of course, but the residual household waste, I think the department's done extremely well to get everything sorted out and done. Grass cutting in the same way has been subject to work and social distancing, and that's been the key in terms of all of the reintroducing of our basic work. I'm going to say the pop-up traffic, if you like, lanes and pinch point work with the new cycle provision certainly is a challenge, because of course with slightly decreased traffic we're going to get larger speeds, and there's a danger there, and something which has to be watched very carefully at. Finally, for Max transport to school, of course, it is going to be a difficult one, but the department's doing, honestly, extremely well, and I'm not at all concerned at the moment that we're falling behind in any way with providing the required services. I'm going to leave it there for now, Chairman, if I may. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. I really appreciate that. What we'll do is now we go to questions. At the moment, I've got 3. This is David, James, and Max. So we'll go with David Bill first. Would you like to ask the question?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. This is obviously a fast-moving scene, and I think we're all grateful to the department for everything that's and all the staff for everything that's being done. Can I just go back to the report? In Appendix A, there's a list there of the services which we've had to stand down, and that's all understandable. But in the top section, there's various references to what are really safety aspects, such as safety barrier renewals, the safety scheme programs, street lighting, and planned bridge work, etc. Now, I understand that obviously this had to be paused, but can I just express the hope that as soon as the situation allows, that we will return to this safety work, in fact, and keep the safety work programme underway as a priority. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Over to you, Anne. I'm sure that what the answer is going to be, but I'll let you answer it. Over to you, Anne.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. No, I would reassure Mr. Bill that absolutely we will be standing up work as soon as we can. And again, just a slightly separate reassurance, any safety critical urgent work in the network will be actioned. This is the planned, programmed maintenance work we would look to do on those safety features every year. Anything critical that happens, safety barrier repairs, if something's taken out, etc., we will be actioning that as a defect. So just to give that reassurance.
Thank you, Anne. Just back to David. Are you happy with that response?
Yes, of course. Yes, yes.
Thank you, David. Next question is from James. James, your question, please.
Thank you very much. Get the video on there. Cool. Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you very much, Anne, for the presentation. Just got a couple of questions, if that's okay. First of all, in regards to the waste sites and the booking system, obviously the booking systems come in with a view to sort of ensuring social distancing is in place, but we've discussed in the briefings that might become a long-term thing. Could I ask that before it becomes sort of a permanent part of operation, a report brought back to this committee, so we can look at how successful that is, what the feedback from the public is, the pros and the cons, before that sort of is made a permanent fixture, if that's okay. I've had some feedback from residents, and actually it's been really positive. But I think before we have quite a significant change, it would be good just to get that sort of oversight, first of all. And I guess it's very early, but have the department had any feedback either way on the success of that? And the second question is, it's either could have come under this, it would actually come under the carbon paper we've got later on, but you mentioned a lot of this team are working from home, as they are in most organisations now across the country. I was just wondering whether we've considered whether that might be something we want to consider on a longer term basis. Obviously the pros and cons to that, but one of the big pros would be the effect on the environment, because obviously that's not people then driving to and from the office. It's not the impact on the office itself. As I said, there'd be definitely pros and cons to that, but I just wondered if that's something that was being considered at all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. Can I just suggest, Anne, that you answer the first question, and the second question we bring it under the carbon, because I know from our briefing that maybe other members want to add to that. Are you happy with that?
Thank you, Chair. I'll pick that up then. In terms of the booking system, there's been, from the service point of view and hopefully from the customer point of view, a lot of benefits in that. I'm sure members of the committee will have seen media headlines in other areas about length of queues and wait times for hours to actually access RHWS facilities in other parts of the country. And largely, with the exception of the first day or so, we've not, our residents fortunately haven't experienced anything like that. They're able to book a slot and have relative confidence that they can be seen within a certain time, etc. And also in terms of managing the capacity, maximising the capacity and managing the through flow of our sites from the service point of view and delivery point of view, it's been massively beneficial. But I absolutely appreciate that, you know, the committee might want to understand a bit more about the pros and cons of that before it was made into a permanent aspect. And we are actually considering whether any consultation or anything would be appropriate around that. But at the moment, the feedback, we haven't had any particular negative feedback. We've had in the early days, bear in mind this was a new system that we brought in a matter of weeks. It took, normally you would take months to do, to test, etc., etc. We've had a few teething problems behind the scene, but our IT colleagues have been really good in helping us work through those. So some people might have seen the odd teething problem from the actual using it online, but we are working through those as we've had those. No real negative, you know, pushback, I would say, from the public, but up and down. But you know, overall, I think the view would be it's quite a positive thing, definitely from the service point of view as well. But happy to have a wider discussion. I'll just briefly go on to the you know, the carbon type benefits of the existing scenario and working from home, as well as lots less traffic out there, etc. Absolutely, we want to capture that as much as possible. And definitely in terms of, you know, us as a department, there will be far more working from home in future. At the moment, it's standing up with social distancing. County Hall, for instance, is only going to be able to cater for about 20% of the normal, you know, contingent that would be in there. So inevitably, that means we'll be working at home for far more of us will be working at home for longer. But equally, just ongoing indefinitely, we want to capture that and maximise the ability. So I absolutely agree, we will be doing what we can on that front.
Thank you, Anne. I really appreciate the speed and the mechanics put into place to get the sites opened, and it's amazing it would have taken longer. Sometimes as a member, and I'm sure other members feel, we spend a lot of time consulting. Sometimes accepting there's going to be teething problems, getting done things a bit quicker is the best way to learn, but that's just a personal view. We've got Janet who would like to, Janet, are you there? Oh, sorry, Max. Sorry, no, Max, you're next. Sorry, there's a queue here, but one didn't come through. Over to you, Max.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Firstly, thank you very much for your report, and I think everybody will realise the amount of extra work that's been going on in the department, and I think certainly from my point of view, I've not had any complaints about the new recycling and refuse system, and that tells me that it's going reasonably okay. I note from Trevor's introduction that he's well on top of his brief, and very pleased to see him in this new role. And just wanted to start off with some sort of high level issue really, which is on the political side, and that is that in May we received some quite exuberant press releases from government, and they promised, I'm talking about the one issued by Grant Shapps on the 5th of May, which promised the largest ever boost for cyclists and pedestrians, that's people who walk, emergency bike lanes and streets that would help support transport network, trials of rental e-scooters to be brought forward to increase green transport options, and the final bullet point was government working with lead tech developers to reduce crowding on public transport. And he then goes on to talk about 250 million across the country, obviously, on emergency active travel. And it's active travel I just want to ask him about, because Grant Shapps' report typically perhaps is most ambitious and most enthusiastic, but there is a gap that I can spot between the approach from government and the approach in this report, which is heavily conditioned. And I refer to paragraph 20, which of the report we've got today, which talks about the range of things we will be looking at in the emergency period, which don't seem to echo the ambitions of government. Now, it could well be that the government is hyping it up a bit, to coin a phrase. But can you, Trevor, give us some reassurance that the £300,000 that we've already been allocated for active travel will be spent on active travel? Because it could go a million different ways, from maintenance to backing up other major projects. We need that reassurance, I think. And then I've got a couple of minor points for Anne, if I may, Chair.
We'll do those now, and then we'll go back. We'll start. Okay, get those two minor points, then we'll go through the flow with Trevor.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Well, the first question was, do we have a duty of care or some responsibilities towards school buses and transport, but particularly the bus companies, where they're private services? Or are the conditions on the buses, for example, entirely a matter of public health and safety and so on between the company and the users? And the second point was just to back up, I think, what's said in the report and what David said, that the school crossing patrols in busy schools, and most of them are busy, are really important to residents and to keep parents, grandparents and their children. And I'm grateful that some effort, being reassured, is being put into backfilling the posts that we can't currently use. So that's the school crossing patrols.
Thank you, Max. We'll go to Trevor. Though I must confess, you're asking him to sort of respond to a question that's been put by the central government, but I'm sure Trevor can put some light on it. Over to you, Trevor.
Thank you, Max. I'm going to say that throughout your questioning, I was disconnected and reconnected, so I may give you a disconnected answer. I do apologise. The 300,000 most certainly is already being looked at very clearly in terms of its exact allocation, and we, if you like, technically ring-fence that ourselves, and we will do exactly what it says on the tin from central government in that sense, Max. I think you said something about, right at the end, our duty to transport providers. I know we are providing 25%. We're not duty bound to our providers as a retention. In some respects for sends transport and the like, but I'd really like to refer that to Anne, if I may, Chairman, for a definitive, because I did miss a little bit of what you said, and I do apologise. It wasn't deliberate, but somehow I was disconnected.
That's okay, Trevor. The technology will get better, I'm sure, as we go along the line. These things are going to happen, so let's not worry. Anne, could you just respond to those final two important points from Maxley, please?
Certainly will, Chair. Thank you. Yes, just on that last point, in terms of duty of care, the government came out, it was one of the first bits of guidance we got from the government, when lockdown happened, was around bus services. And they made clear they very much expected local authorities to fully honour existing contracts. So we have been fully paying those existing contracts. But at the same time, government has awarded a number of funding streams directly to bus operators through things like the Bus Service Operators Grant. So I would say, yes, we have a duty of care, but I think the government has recognised they too have, and it has been, a very much split approach. We have, sorry, not split, collaborative approach. We've been supporting as local authorities in terms of our existing subsidised routes and those contracts, and the government's done its own thing direct to the operators, because I think we all recognise how valuable it is, and actually it's in nobody's interest if the private sector bus operators go under because of this existing situation. When we come out of it, how are people going to move around, etc.? How are we going to fill that gap? So the interest is very much there in terms of supporting those operators. And note your point, thank you very much, about school crossing patrols, and yes, we are trying to stand those up as soon as we can. It's primarily around our ability to have the staff there, summer shielding, etc. But we are doing that because we understand how important they are to those communities. And just to again just confirm what Mr. Pendleton said, pop-up measures, the money for the active transport absolutely will be spent on active transport and those pop-up measures or those measures identified to support that active transport. And actually, just as a give you that double reassurance, is we have to submit tomorrow our proposals, and it's only when DFT have signed those off will they release the money to us.
Thank you, Anne.
Can I just add, I don't think Anne covered quite what I was asking in terms of school transport. Have we got a duty where school transport has been privately provided, not under contract to Leicestershire County Council?
Okay, thank you, Max.
Schools, the secondary schools, for example, that run buses over quite a large area by the parents or by the school.
Okay, over to you, Anne.
I didn't misunderstand you. I didn't pick up that point. The short answer is no. We can ask the operators to ensure they have social distancing in, etc., etc. We can work with them to support, but we have no powers to do anything when it is done, provided privately or commissioned by a third party, such as a school, for their school transport. So the absolute short answer is no. We would always try and work to encourage and, influence for best practice, etc. But we have no direct powers in that relation.
Max, just a matter of interest, the schools that I'm involved with, they all commission their own private transport, particularly, I think, secondary colleges and the trusts, and I do believe they're responsible for setting guidelines and policies in regard to their private contracts. I'm sure that's the case. And I'm sure they're very, very responsible in doing that as well. Can we move on, because we've got a long agenda? We've got a question from Janice. Are you there, Janet?
I am, Chairman, thank you. Mine is really just, I really must congratulate Anne and Joanne Guile and officers that have managed to open the 7 recycling centres at such short notice. I mean, you've done an amazing job, and I'd just like to thank you so much for all the hard work that must have gone into it. So many, many thanks. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Janet. I just want to we've had some notes, and I'm sure members are reading this. We've got Jo on, one of the officers, does a great job there. Just to read out what she said, to support Anne's answer regarding carbon benefits going forward of working from home. Anne chairs a cross-departmental board, and we discussed recently looking at how working patterns, etc., should be considered and capture the climate carbon benefits in the future. This is a work stream the authority is picking up. So just to make everybody aware, we are aware of it. There is work, and I'm sure we'll get further reports at this committee, and I appreciate that. And secondly, we need to bring this up, I think, when we go to the carbon, so we don't get it confused for our public. And Les would like to bring in some additional information later on regarding the downfall. There is some downfalls of working away at home, and I'll let Les bring that up because he brought some very important points. But let's address that in the right agenda item. So if we've finished this item, we're quite happy. We'll move on to agenda number 9, and here we have Ian, the Assistant Director, will present on this item pages 21 to 124. Your agenda, we have it's to do with the road casualty reductions in Leicestershire, which is a very important factor of this committee. And we've also got Graham Crompton from the Leicestershire Police. Now Graham's going to do, I'm sure Ian will sort of introduce him, but at the same time he'll do a short presentation, and then I'm sure we've all read the report, then members can ask questions to the report. Over to you, Ian.
Hello, Chair. Thank you very much for that. Yes, I'd like to introduce Graham, if that's okay for members to start with. Graham works for the police in their road safety unit. Many of you will be aware of him. He does a sterling effort going out to parish councils, who's working in the road safety partnership. And I think Graham's one of those people who's been around longer than I have, so he's extremely knowledgeable. So, Graham, I'd like to hand it over to yourself, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members, Ian and Anne. Thank you for that, Ian. I've been around a long time, but I don't pretend to know it all. Yeah, members, I know you're going to have a very long meeting today, and I submitted the report to you covering a whole range of topics which the police and the local authorities are involved in. Do you want me to run through my report, or are you going to ask me questions on the particular topics? Just to remind you, my report covered the Road Safety Partnership, casualty trends, reporting of casualty accidents and statistics, the enforcement that we're doing across a whole range of offences, the Community Speed Watch programme, what is happening across the county in terms of weight restrictions, the formulation and work of the Safer Roads team, the Road Safety Unit, the static and mobile cameras, and a little bit I've added on, which is what we're going to be looking at post-COVID in terms of our priorities. And I just wonder at this stage, do you want to ask me particular questions, or do you want me to run through each one individually?
I think that would take Graham. We've got a long agenda. What you've just done there is brilliant. What you've done is now you've itemised the major issues. Just spend a couple of minutes just saying how you did the report, I guess, and just a few points, and then we'll get questions. So take 2 or 3 minutes, and then I'll bring the questions in. Are you happy with that?
Very quickly, Mr. Chairman, thank you. The Road Safety Partnership is very viable. Janet chairs the board. We had a meeting yesterday when we dealt with a whole series of road safety projects, many of which have stood still during the COVID period, but we're trying to get them back on track. In terms of casualty trends, I know you'll be interested in that. We did record the lowest number of casualties in the policing area in 2019. Now, that sounds very good, and I'm very pleased with that. But I think we have to bear in mind a couple of things. One is that the public are now reporting a lot of casualties on the online system, which are not recorded in the statistics. And the other major item on this is that the force control room are not sending officers to every single casualty accident. If it's not a priority, in other words, if there's no congestion at the scene and no allegations, then we won't necessarily send someone to the scene, so we won't pick up that statistic. In terms of enforcement, moving on quickly, I've probably mentioned this before, we are resurrecting the Fatal 4 programme as soon as possible, and we will be running Fatal 4 operations, probably one a week, post-COVID, across the whole of the force area. We will be concentrating on drugs and driving, seatbelt misuse, distraction, which is likely to be a big problem for us post-COVID, and speed. Very quickly, on the first one, drugs and driving, drink driving, we've got a major problem here on our hands, both locally and nationally, because the incidence of this offence is going up. And post-COVID, we were arresting 100 people every month for these offences, so there's a big problem for the Road Safety Partnership. Seatbelt use, non-compliance is high, and this results in a minor bump becoming a casualty bump and quite often a serious injury accident. Distraction, there's still an awful lot of work to do on it in terms of people using the mobile phone and other gadgets in vehicles, thereby having a serious collision. And speed, the NPCC, the old ACPO, launched a speed campaign on the 25th of May, and we were very pleased because that's the first campaign post-COVID. Well, it's still in COVID, obviously. And we've had a major campaign across the whole of the force area. unfortunately, and a lot of the members will know this, we have picked up a lot of speed complaints during COVID because of many drivers, or at least a minority of drivers, have seen it as an opportunity to increase their speeds on the open roads. And we have been dealing with some very horrendous speeds, particularly on the motorway, where many cases of over 100 miles an hour have been recorded. Just moving on quickly, Chairman, in terms of Community Speed Watch, we placed a lot of emphasis on this with our colleagues in the County Council. We have got over 20 schemes in the pipeline. We haven't delivered any of those because of COVID. We're looking at what we can do in the months we've got left in 2020 to actually get some of those schemes delivered. And I know that Jana and team are looking at the possibility of introducing some signs-only schemes where when we can't get the volunteers onto the site. So that is a useful initiative that we're looking at. In terms of weights, just to say that we have got a lot of problems with non-compliance or allegations of non-compliance across the whole of the county with about 18 sites running. We are using a more proactive response to complaints of weights. I've mentioned this before, where we want the reports to come through the parish clerks instead of direct to the police. When we get them, if the complaint is going on and on, we are making contact with the hauliers direct. We're finding that often works, and obviously it doesn't mean that we've got to send officers to the scene. So we're doing what we can on weights. We're not satisfying everyone, but we'll stick at it. On a major plus side, the Safer Roads team has gone from strength to strength during COVID, and as a force we've relied almost totally on the Safer Roads team to deal with all the traffic complaints that we've been tackling, including the speed complaints. We managed to get them a second vehicle in the last 3 months, and also the vehicle has been equipped with ANPR, which is an excellent facility for the officers. When I next report on this, I know that this group is going to go from strength to strength, because at the moment we are looking for some more additional special constables to put into that particular group of officers. But only to say that we're very, very pleased with the progress made to date. The Road Safety Unit, I know you're interested in what they're doing. The mobile camera vans and the static cameras, we had to curtail a lot of the operation during COVID. We're now getting the operation back on its feet, and only in the last couple of days the mobile camera vans are up to post-COVID activity. So you will see the vans in your communities in the days and weeks to come, and I'm very pleased about that. In addition to my report, Jana chaired the board meeting yesterday. We had a long conversation about post-COVID road safety activity. A lot of it's still in the melting pot, but just to give you a quick overview, Jana wants us to look at vulnerable road users, cycles and pedestrians. Anne's already mentioned that activity in her talk. Older drivers, because they are featuring quite heavily in the statistics, and continuing to look at rural roads with the County Council, because over half the casualties are taking place on the rural roads in our 60-mile-per-hour speed limit. So that's 4 items there that we will be looking at closely. And I think there, Mr. Chairman, I'll pull up and see if anybody wants to ask me any questions.
Graham, that was fantastic. Well done. And we have a few questions. I will go straight to Max, and you have a question. Fire away, Max.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Graham, for your report this afternoon, but also on paper, as it were. I was struck by a sentence in Appendix A, paragraph 14, which says that quite appropriately that parents have genuine safety concerns about walking their children to school, and I thought it would be a good idea if we could have some more evidence on that, so that we can take appropriate actions, whatever they may be. And whilst we've got some excellent information, I wondered if in a future report we can have the data broken down by the vulnerable road users, and particularly give us an idea of the real dangers to pedestrians, children going to school, and of course cyclists and motorcycles, who are also in the vulnerable category. I think there's an associated issue with this, in that if people have safety concerns about walking, they won't walk, and therefore the statistics will be affected by that. So if parents don't want their children to cycle to school, the number of accidents and casualties with children cycling to school will be very low. But that doesn't necessarily reflect the anxiety or indeed the real dangers of cycling where proper provision isn't provided. And I have to say that I get so many concerns about cycles on pavements. But that, of course, is a consequence of the dangers people perceive of cycling on the roads, or indeed the lack of cycleways. So there's some big issues behind these statistics. And I just wanted to finish by saying that it's very good to see a reduction in overall casualties, and that has been happening regularly, but it is affected by reporting, whereas killed and seriously injured collisions, KSIs, are not affected by reporting because they're all reported, and those unfortunately are flatlining, as the report says, and so there's plenty of work to do for you and your colleagues, Graham, unfortunately. But thank you very much for your report.
Yeah, thank you for that. You're quite right with the pedestrian and cycle issue. Again, we're looking like you're looking at what is going to be the new norm, and we've got to get our heads around lots of changes that are going to be before us in the weeks and months to come. And cycling is a major issue for the police, and obviously for the cyclists as well. And we've got to do an awful lot of work on that, which we've already started. Thank you for mentioning the targets. We have just agreed on our targets, and sorry, Anne, you've not got a copy of this report yet, Ian, but you will have in the next few days. We've just done our targets, and because we're looking pretty good at the moment, we're looking for a 10% drop in the serious, the KSIs and the slides during the next 5 years. We've only gone up to 2020 with our targets. So, and of course with COVID, this is going to affect the figures as well. So you know, we're not quite sure whether we've got the targets right, but nevertheless, we have fixed the targets, and we will plough on to try and reduce casualties further. But yes, thank you for that summary particularly regarding footways and cyclists, because it's going to be very interesting for the partnership to tackle.
Thank you, Graham. Look, there's so much in the report, and we've got a few questions, so we'll move on. But the big issue, I think Max touched on it a little bit as well, and you mentioned it quite clearly, is the reporting mechanisms have changed, which makes following statistical and data through the years difficult, and I think we all agree with that. So we have to interpret, be clever, and understand the changes, so we do get a clear picture whether what is working and what isn't. The next question is, I'm just looking at James, over to you.
Thank you very much, Graham, for the presentation. I just want to pick a question on something you said in the presentation, if that's okay, regarding drug and drink driving increasing nationally. What are the factors that are likely to be behind that? And is that a trend we see locally as well as nationally? And as an addition, really, to that question, is there anything we can do locally to reverse that trend? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's a very, very interesting and important question that is being looked at both nationally and locally. From a personal point of view, all the information that I am gathering tends me to believe that we've got a serious problem on our hands with drug driving. And we've got an enormous amount of work to do on it. There are some forces already who are already indicating that they are detaining more people for the drugs element than they are for the alcohol element, which gives some indication of how important it is. Again, it's a very difficult one for the Road Safety Partnership to tackle. We are trying to do it through education. And Jonathan Clarkson, the comms officer, is putting out, lots of messages on this. But it's not one we can wave a magic wand on. We are training, which should be interesting to know, a lot more police officers to actually carry out the drugs element. So that, again, is likely to affect the figures in so much as there will be, going forward post-COVID, more tests being carried out. Because of COVID, we aren't going to do the month-long summer campaign, but we are gearing up already for the December-January Drink, Drug, Drive campaign, and I know that the drugs element will feature greatly in it. That's really about all I can say at the moment on it, unfortunately.
Thank you, Graham. I think it's a great question. When we say drugs, though, to everybody, members as well, it's not just people that take drugs recreational. As in other countries, it's the medical stuff. It's some of the tablets you take with morphine in it and other tablets that can make you drowsy. These can affect your ability to drive. So it's a whole range of drugs, not just recreational drugs. Let's go to Ian, and then we'll go to...
Alan,
yes?
Alan, can I just put in? Sorry, I can't send a question this afternoon. It just won't accept it.
By all means. Is that David or is it Bill?
Bill Bolter.
Hello, Bill. Over to you, Bill.
Yeah, it's just ask Graham. Community speed watch schemes, something I'm quite interested in. You say we've got 20 schemes waiting to go ahead. When we do those, we're going to promote it a bit more this year? And also, it's a good news that accidents are actually reducing within the county.
Chair, it's Ian. Could I come in on that one?
Yeah, thanks, Ian.
Yes, Chair. So essentially, we only managed to do 20 schemes a year because that's the capacity that we have for delivering the kit, the police support we have for those. So we do have a waiting list for them. So actually, we invite out applications to come in each year. We assess those that are coming back, but we don't have the capacity to do any more than the 20. So we wouldn't advertise them more fully because we just don't end up with a larger queue.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you.
And it's something, Bill, that we, as a Scrutiny in the future, we keep an eye on. And if we need to look at the contents, this is what we do with Ian. I have somebody's been trying to type, and it's come through. Thank you for that. Back to you, Ian. Do you want to just sum up the report?
Yeah, very briefly. So what we've actually brought to you here is our annual report, and thank you, Graham, very much for taking us through the work of the police and the Road Safety Partnership, who we work very, very closely with. In the report, as you say, it's very long. This is Leicestershire's report dealing with casualties for the whole of 2018, those casualties that are almost complete for 2019. And there's a very comprehensive list of all the work we do, including that with the Road Safety Partnership, be it from education, junior road safety officers, dealing with many of the issues that you've dealt with here. I would say in Appendix D, we do deal far more with the statistics about how they're sort of bottomed out for killed and seriously injured across Leicestershire. are basically we've had no increases really in the vulnerable road users for pedestrians and cyclists, and happy to supply members with other details if they want in future reports. Quite happy to take forward any questions you've got, Chair. And we've also dealt with there, as Graham's touched on, the COVID-19. We've been part of feeding into the Department for Transport traffic level monitorings, which some of you may have seen on the government's updates every day. But we are watching very closely what happens with traffic, driver behaviour, and any mode shifts towards walking, cycling as things move from buses. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, I think there's no questions coming up here at the moment. I think it's been covered really well by Graham and yourself. I have one message from David, and it's a big thank you to Graham, and he obviously continue to do this. He has agreed, and I've spoke to him at depth about this, that he will talk about bridges a bit further in the future when we can bring it up. Okay, so we had a very in-depth discussion the year before on bridges, and I'm sure we'll cross that bridge when it comes over again. Okay, can I go over to Trevor? Would you like to sum up this session on this section, Trevor?
Yeah, with apologies, Chairman, I wasn't expecting you to call me. And so
that's all right, Trevor. I tried before, and we are having difficulties with you're breaking up now. I can see the screen, some difficulties. Okay, what we'll do is, Trevor, if you're hearing me, we'll just plough on with it. We are having network problems. And if you can type or any questions to me, we'll try and resolve it this end. So let's go on to the next agenda item, agenda item 10. And this is the Department of Transport Decarbonisation Transport Setting. And what we're doing is setting the challenge. We've got a lovely presentation coming up. That's fantastic. I think we're going over to Anne Carruthers for this. So Anne, we talked at depth in at the briefing on this, and we will have some, I know we will have some questions on this. So over to you, Anne.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, if you're all right, I'll talk to the slides. There is a covering report, and there is the DFT's document that they've issued, Decarbonising Transport Setting the Challenge. If I can just make one point clear at the beginning, this isn't a plan on decarbonising transport from the DFT at this point in time. This is about the work we want to do to engage over the next few months in order to develop that plan. So they're aiming by the end of the year to have a decarbonising transport plan, but this is very much about engaging with stakeholders nationally to formulate that and shape it. So this is our opportunity, really, or the beginning of a journey of our opportunity to feed into that process. So we felt we wanted to bring it to Scrutiny to have that conversation, to make sure Scrutiny is able to feed into us so we can respond to government appropriately. Kat is very kindly doing the slides for me, so she moves on to the second slide. This is just a reminder of the wider national targets in relation to climate change, but more closer to home is a reminder of the county council's own carbon commitments to be net zero on our own emissions by 2030 and on Leicestershire's wider emissions by 2050, and that is set out in our carbon reduction roadmap, which I'm sure you're familiar with because we've brought it here and discussed it with you before, and equates to both those tranches, tranche 1 by 2030 and tranche 2, the wider emissions, by 2050. And we do see that the decarbonising transport plan will greatly assist us in achieving those reductions in tranche 2 carbon emissions, because transport across the county, you'll appreciate, isn't entirely within our control in terms of the emissions from that. So this could go a long way to help us mitigating and reducing some of those emissions. If you can have the next slide, please, Kat. Just a quick reminder, government put this document out in March, and what they're wanting is they're wanting you fed back later this month on key principles that they are setting out there that'll set the means of, the early part of the conversation and begin to allow us to drill down over the next few months. They had originally intended to get to the end of that process and have the finalised document by November this year at the Conference of Parties international event that was supposed to be happening in Glasgow, but is now being postponed for a year. However, they're still indicating they want to work to that timetable to get the plan in place on that timetable. And I think we would agree it's needed as soon as possible, so we would be fully supportive of that. If we would just move on to the next slide then, please, Kat. At the top of that slide, the 6 bullet points set out there, the strategic priorities that they have outlined. Our response to that would be very much in general, we are supportive of those. You will discuss some of them already in our conversations in the earlier report to do with COVID, active travel, etc. So they're covering that. They're looking at road vehicles and the technology and what that has, the contribution that can have to reducing emissions. The freight aspect, as we've seen even more in the COVID lockdown scenario, more and more deliveries, online shopping, etc., as we would have expected. How are we decarbonising that? As well as looking at the green technology and impacts on the economy overall. I think it is interesting that within the document, the DFT does acknowledge very much that what's been done to date hasn't actually gone far enough, been quick enough, and they need to do more. So, I think we'd very much echo that and welcome that statement. On the slight downside to that, at the moment, but we still have a long way to go, so I would caveat it, we don't particularly see anything in the report that's going to massively redress, that position. However, we may just be a bit early in prejudging that, and let's hope that, the interventions in the document that we get at the end of this very much gives us a more proactive and robust plan around decarbonisation. If I can move to the next slide then, please, Kat, about our response to the document in the early phases. This outlines the key messages we would want to give back. Remember, it's kind of high level at the moment, and there'll be plenty of time over the summer to drill down in some of those areas. But as I say, they're kind of the key headline things we would want to make at this point on their principles. Firstly, the ones I would just highlight to you are that we are overall generally supportive of what they're trying to do and what they're saying and the approach they're taking, but we want to really kind of make a number of areas to emphasise for them. We do think that we need to see greater leadership by central government. Often at times we can see there's a view that comes out of central government that says, you're the local areas, you know your area best, therefore you decide how you're going to do it. But actually, on some matters, it needs a national lead. Prime examples, and we have talked about these before in this committee, are things like air quality, also things like electric vehicle charging infrastructure. It's no good us as Leicestershire investing in one particular type of infrastructure if authorities across the country are going to invest in other types, because as a motorist, you need to have confidence that you can charge wherever you happen to go, etc. So it's that kind of thing that needs a national lead, and we really need government to grasp that and take on that mantle. We can't ignore the COVID reality of the moment, and there's a lot, as we've discussed in the earlier report, we don't know what the long-term impacts of this are going to be around the transport agenda. And it was raised there, I think it was by Mr. Poland, about some of the benefits we're seeing at the moment from home working, etc., reductions in carbon, air quality. In fact, I did hear something on the news where Los Angeles has seen the lowest levels of air pollution since the 1980s because of the lockdown. There's lots of things happening now that if we can really grab them and begin to solidify them and lock them in, we can hopefully take some big steps forward on this agenda. The next thing another key point is we would want to highlight to government we need longer term funding. We often just get single year funding allocations or we're bidding. And actually, in terms of making sure you're investing in the right infrastructure, etc., it can be very hard to do that on that kind of funding regime. So again, that's one we want to highlight. Another one is, there isn't one size fits all. I mean, let's face it, even just locally, transport solutions and decarbonised transport solutions for Leicestershire and the county area could be or would be quite different to some of the solutions you would want to implement in the likes of Leicester City, because you've got, critical mass, density, etc., etc. So we really would want to highlight that point. There isn't a one size fits all, and we need to, target and really tailor some of the actions coming out of this if we are to be successful. If I can move to the next slide, please, Kat. This looks at each of the priorities and some of the key points we would want to make in response to those. I'll just pick out a couple, if I may, to highlight to you. The need for a national fuel strategy. What technologies will dictate what technologies we should be investing in, and therefore what infrastructure we should be investing in. And it's the same example I gave you as the electric vehicle charging. There needs to be a consistency across this. I'm sure we all remember the video when they came out, videos came out, Betamax and VHS, invest in the wrong technology and you could be left way behind. So we need a national lead on that. We can't forget the last mile of a journey in relation to deliveries in our urban area, because often that is the biggest impact in terms of carbon from that particular movement. But again, in personal travel, the last mile is really critical because that often sways the transport choice for that whole journey. So we need to get better join up there. We have a significant challenge in ensuring how we provide for vulnerable groups in our rural communities. They can be traditionally harder to cater for, and to do this in a low carbon way that ensures inclusion is something that actually is quite a priority for us as Leicestershire being a rural county. I think, again, the COVID situation, that point about we have some other opportunities that are really coming up to accelerate some of the things we'd want to see in decarbonising our transport system. It was mentioned earlier in the agenda, e-scooters. And for instance, government are consulting on legislation that would allow those. Previously, or up to now, they're not legal in this country. Therefore, things like that being accelerated could really help. So we have got an opportunity to grab with a lot of those particular, what we've seen as barriers or elements missing in the jigsaw puzzle. I will move on to the next slide. And that takes us to our recommendations and next steps. And as I say, very much it's about high-level priorities and our opportunity to feedback. So welcome our committee's views on that. But beyond that, the DFT are saying there'll be stakeholder engagement sessions, workshops, sessions. So obviously we will continue to engage and keep you updated on that as things move forward over the summer. And then the very final slide just compares the timeline for the DFT's work on this decarbonising transport plan, and then with our own environment strategy and action plan and our carbon reduction roadmap. And it means the two are kind of integrated. We can continue because our environment strategy action plan and our carbon reduction roadmap are very much live documents. We will continue to update and refresh as needed. And actually it means that we can dovetail that with the decarbonising transport work as it evolves during this year. Right, I'll stop there and very much welcome the debate and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. We've got a few questions. Just quite interesting. I'm sitting here with Kat, and when you mentioned beta versus VHS, she looked at me and thought, "What beta? What's VHS?" It shows you how much we've moved on. The first question I've got, well, it's not a question. It is an observation. So over to you, David.
Okay, thank you very much, Anne. That's a very important report, well, as all these reports are. Can I refer to page 175 of the document, and this is where we have a picture of a freight haul train and a report of the government's commitment to rail freight. And in fact, it mentions electrification as well. So I think that one of the things we can do immediately, if we're going to have an opportunity to respond to this, is to go back to the government and say that electrification of the Midland Main Line is a priority, still a priority, and we hope that they will return to that. But more specifically, could I just look at this question of rail freight and what it means for this part of the country, because we have a plethora of rail freight applications, rail freight depot applications, which of course is fine in practice. But if the so-called rail freight depot is stuck in the middle of the countryside, as it would be at Sapcut, then what you're going to be faced with is a massive amount of lorry movements. So you might have one train in a day or one train in a week, but if it's used as a pretext for a massive warehouse complex, then it will just simply be heavy lorries in and heavy lorries out. And I wouldn't have thought that was a contribution to decarbonisation. So I would just like to give leave that if we are collecting opinions before the end of June, I'd like to submit, first of all, something along the lines of that electrification is to be encouraged, and we hope that the Midland Main Line will remain a major candidate. But secondly, that the rail freight depot concept must take account of whether of the impact of these freight depots, and to ensure that they are actually installed where there is a close demand. In other words, goods coming in by rail straight from the rail into a manufacturing place and out again by rail, and not having an intermediary flow of massive HGV movements. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, David. I'm sure I'll support Anne in this. We'll continue to look at this as a scrutiny. I know from yourself you've represented your residents in the issue of your area, and I'm sure you'll continue to do that. You've mentioned this depot around the M69 Junction 2 on many occasions, and I'm sure you'll continue to do that. And that's what scrutiny for the general public is all about. We keep an eye on things and we make sure questions get answered. So thank you for that, and we'll move on to the next question. Les, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Hi, good afternoon, Anne. I think if I may, Chair, one's an observation or a request. The concept and the noise about the potential for home working has been mentioned on and off throughout this afternoon. I seem to recall from days gone by in my university world, which was as a mature student, so not that long ago, where social interactions between human beings is something like 60% of all friendships are formed through the workplace, and 30% of personal relationships, as in husbands, partners, wives, girlfriends, boyfriends, and the like. So could I just ask senior officers and cabinet members really just to, as we explore this concept of home working, where there is a significant environmental win, we know that, but can I ask that the senior officers and senior members bear that social interaction issue in mind, please? And just as a heads up, University of Leicester have recently started some new research on this particular area. So can I just leave that as thoughts for the aforementioned people, please, Chair? The second question really is more specific, if I may, Anne, and it relates to your page, just bear me a second, 214. And it's decarbonising how we get our goods, last mile deliveries, using small vans, electric vehicles as opposed to HGVs. To my knowledge, and final mile is preserved of the parcel carriers, and they don't use HGVs to deliver on the final mile. They are already small vans. So I'm really curious to understand much more about what we are specifically talking about there, and how we, as a local government authority, would be seeking to influence what are commercial decisions by private sector organisations. So I guess it's a request really, Anne, for much more understanding, maybe on a report, of what we're actually talking about on that final mile issue. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Les. Just some good questions. I think, not to take anything away from Anne, just to move the meeting on. I think number one, I think if I could request for the group that Anne or an officer just chase up that report from Leicestershire, from the university. I think that's very good. I think mental health is an important issue for this council. We take it very seriously. And you're right, there is wins and losses. You know, I live alone and it's been pretty bonkers, I must confess. You know, being on my own, it's not... I've done a bit of shielding but it's been tough, so I understand that. I think secondly, I think we will. I'm sure we'll get a report on the transport hubs. From my experience of hubs, you get your big trucks coming into the hub and the small ones coming out, so they still generate big trucks. So, but I wouldn't know what the density is and numbers. I do think it's an issue, but of course business is important too. So we've got to marry the best of both worlds when it comes down to, you know, business and the environment. So it's an act. But we'll take these points. I'm sure we've got them in the notes here, and we'll bring them up at the next briefing with Anne. So we look at that. But thank you, Les. Some great points. I'm just looking at the questions. Max, you've got a question.
I have indeed. Thanks very much. A couple of points and a question. First of all, on our presumably collective desire to have more leadership or greater leadership nationally, so that we can see our way forward. I can understand that, but I think there is a role for leadership locally, or certainly regionally, which is difficult without a combined authority. But maybe that is something we need. We need maybe a regional mayor, who knows. But we have got to show some leadership from a Leicestershire point of view. And I was struck by the comment that I think Anne made about the city having a critical mass which they can use to bring in cleaner transport, more active travel and so on. But I think we forget that quite a large area of the city transport area is in the county, and we've got 150,000 people who look directly to the city for their transport needs, getting in and out of work. So I think there's a lot to be gained by working with the city, and not pushing the city aside and saying, well, you can do it because you've got critical mass, we haven't got critical mass. But my question was really going back to a discussion we had in this committee last year, or perhaps a few months before that, when it seemed to be the consensus that technology would solve the problem. In other words, we'd stop burning fossil fuels on the road and we'd go electric, and that would solve the problem. And I just wondered if that's an oversimplification. And also, even if we did go electric, there are all sorts of associated problems we've got to get around, like its load on the grid and how people charge their vehicles on street. But there are details. The main thing is technology the answer, or have we got to reduce our use of private transport and use more public transport?
Thank you, Max. Anne, have you got any response to that?
Yeah, no, we can debate all afternoon, but I'll try and keep it concise.
Keep it short, yeah.
Yeah, if I take the last point first, technology, is it the answer? Well, no, it's not, but I think it's part of the puzzle. You know, it's a jigsaw puzzle, it's got to be an element, but you're absolutely right in terms of, you know, we need to technology. You can have your vehicle itself can be zero emission, but where do you get that fuel from, and what's involved in the generation of that fuel, be it hydrogen, be it electricity, be it etc. So then there's the whole life cycle thing, the manufacture of your vehicle that you need to move about, etc. What's the carbon embedded in, both the creation, the construction of that vehicle, and at the end of its life, the how you get rid of it, or what you do with those materials, etc. What's the carbon involved in that? So there's massive questions involved with just more than what's the technology and what's the emissions of that. So you're absolutely right. And then just coming into the point that had just been previously raised about well-being and welfare and behaviours, because as we know, we can all sit at home for weeks and months because of a lockdown scenario like this, and carbon sees a massive benefit, but it doesn't mean it's sustainable in the long term in terms of that well-being element for us as human beings and the social interaction we need. So, I'll keep it short there. I'll basically say technology is part of it. By no means is it all the solution. We've got to, work around that, and it's a much bigger jigsaw. Just to clarify the point about the city, and apologies if I wasn't clear on this, what I was trying to say is solutions that may work for the city, including the county elements of the city for travel and transport and decarbonising transport in that kind of scenario, don't necessarily immediately translate and be successful in some of our other areas that we as the county have, some of our more rural areas. So we want other types of technology solutions, movement issues, home working things, services, initiatives that would help in those rural areas. So that was the point I was trying to make, not just dismissing the city. Absolutely not. We work closely with the city. We will continue to do that, and there's lots of benefit in that. But I was just trying to make the point, solutions that are ideal there don't always naturally translate into some of our other areas across the county. That was the point I was trying to make there.
Thank you, Anne. We've got two more. We'll close those questions and requests. I'm closing it now, so we're going over to. I'm just trying to see. Is it Bill? Is it Bill?
Hello.
Did you want to ask a question, Bill?
Yes, please.
Over to you, sir.
Tram, please. Yes, I've got three questions actually. In the paperwork we got, it says the new debit card for payment spring 2020. Well, we're past that now, so I assume that's coming some other time, but do we know when? And one town chosen for all electric buses, do we know what town yet? And the last one is on the page 214, the last mile by other vehicles other than HGVs. I'd have thought that would have been no carbon vehicles, i.e. electric or hydrogen vehicles, doing the last, the small run rounds rather than using petrol or diesel vehicles. It says in the report. So just those observations, please, Alan.
Okay, we'll take those observations. They're quite clear. We don't need to answer them, but they're quite clear. They're good points. Do you want to say anything on to that? And do you want to know yes or no? Quick.
So, can I just on one, the electric town one, because this will just close it off and clarify. Things have moved on with that. So not the electric town, the electric bus town, Mr. Important word there. DFT have come out over the last few weeks to say they're withdrawing that fund. Sorry, it wasn't that fund. What we've done, we've looked at that bid, we've looked at the cost of it, we've looked at the potential benefits, and it's not something that we feel we can go for at the moment. Sorry, that's the clarity. I knew we'd moved on that one. We have considered fully the criteria, the level of match funding that's required and commitment and work, and it's not something we feel we're able to bid for at the moment, so we're not taking that one forward.
Okay, thank you, Anne.
Thank you.
Trevor, you've got just a point to make. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. It was really for Councillor David Bill. I have a rail freight interchange sitting a mile and a half away from me, and it takes up to 200 odd containers a day into it. And they are servicing most of the southern ports. And I just want to say to David, that if they didn't come via rail, they would come by your front door, and it's the most important thing to bear in mind that we up here will have our needs as you will have your needs, and the more containers you can take off the road, the better diesel-wise it is. And of course, government is also going to take diesel trains very, very significantly and reduce them. And that's going to mean that the case for accelerating Midland Main Line into electric is all that much better. Just those 2 points. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. For those that are interested, the guy who does a lot of movies, a guy called American Michael Moore, who recently released the movie Planet of the Humans, and he's very much an environmentalist. It was quite stunning what he pointed out, that some of the new technology and science isn't actually the answer. It shocked me. So maybe it's worth switching it on for an hour. It's quite a decent movie. Let's go on to the next agenda. Agenda 10. This is 11, forgive me. I'm getting excited there. This is progress implementing the passenger transport policy strategy. The next report sets out the process and implementation of passenger transport policy strategy. These are on pages 217 to 228, and Ian will be presenting that. Thank you, Ian.
Hello, Chair. I hope you can see me. My computer seems to be playing up a bit at the moment and hear me. The purpose of the report is to advise members annually on the implementation of the passenger transport policy and strategy, including outcomes of the service reviews. Members will recall you consider this over a number of years now. We've developed the policy and strategy, and the key aims of this is to provide the most efficient way possible for essential journeys to be made where the commercial market is unable to provide for shopping, primary healthcare, employment training, etc. The reviews of the continuing growing number of supported services, we're now up to 35, following engagement with the community. The outcome could actually be we remove the service, continue, change the service, or replace with a demand responsive transport or other community-based solution. There were 4 phases that we've been working through. We were about to just come to phase 3 and 4, where we were looking to take a holistic view across the whole network, if that was appropriate, if there was one provider. Appendix P shows the 16 services that have already been reviewed, and the outcomes to date are 4 services have been terminated, 9 have been revised with their timings and scheduling, 2 have been replaced with demand responsive transport, and in total around £460,000 worth of savings have made. But in that time we've also had £300,000 worth of growth to support commercial services that were no longer viable. As the work was progressing for the next reviews for the Hinckley and Harbour areas, which were delayed because we'd extended the engagement periods for the other services, from my experience we felt that was necessary. COVID-19 has, of course, as we've spoken about, come along. And there's been a great impact not only on public transport but on the perception for use of public transport, and in some areas it's seen a 90% reduction in usage when the services have still been maintained. Therefore, the decision was taken that we couldn't review these services at this time for phases 3 and 4 until the uncertainty around not only the supported bus networks but the commercial services that are supported had stabilised to a point where we could make reasoned judgment. Therefore, until that time, we won't be continuing with those service reviews, but we'll be watching very closely and, of course, reporting back to Cabinet and to Scrutiny on what further changes could be made as public perception and usage of public transport settles back down. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Are there any questions? I've got nothing on my comment board. Any questions? No? Well, that's a good report, then, isn't it? you must have answered them all. I'm just looking. Anything from Kat? No, nothing. We'll move straight on then. Trevor, would you, as lead on this, any comment on this report?
No, thank you. It was succinct and to the point, and there's nothing I could say. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. We go now to item 12, which is the annual report on funding and performance of community transport. We're into item 12, the annual report, the performance of community transport. These are pages 229 to 242 of your agenda pack. Can I invite Anne to a short presentation? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is, as you say, the annual report on the performance of the community transport operators across the county, and the funding arrangements and how we manage that. Just as a reminder, there are 13 operators that do cover the whole of the county, and there's a map of that at Appendix A, just to remind you what the position is there in terms of actual provision. The members will recall that in 2014-15 MTFS we had a savings of a slight reduction to the budget for community transport and that took it to annually 500,000 that was awarded across those different organisations. We therefore developed a new funding model in order to allocate across the 13 operators, and that was based on 33% of the funding was apportioned according to the population that the operator actually covered and therefore served. 67% related to the number of passengers they carried, but that was after a 10% top slice for rural operations, which acknowledged the potentially higher cost of trips in the rural area. That rural weighting is paid to 5 of the operators within 3 districts across the more rural districts within the county. There was also a reducing amount of grant that the operators could claim for management of the service itself rather than the actual delivery of the service. To implement the changes, we'd actually proposed a phased amount. So basically we give a bit of a security there to each of the operators because there was an element of risk because it did depend how they performed year on year. And what we did is we had a kind of threshold over which they couldn't benefit by in terms of additional payment or see a reduction in terms of reduced payment to help operators adapt as they moved into this new system, and overall that seems to have worked relatively well. Where we're at in terms of performance for the actual patronage, we've seen an 11% decrease between 2018 and 2019. But health-related journeys, that's journeys when they're taking individuals to hospital appointments, have actually seen they've seen an increase over that same time period. The intention, as I've just said, was to allocate the funding. Part of that was based on the passenger numbers they were carrying, and we were going to use that, the latest year's data, to apportion and amend the funding each year into the new financial year. That's not actually happened because we've had some issues with the quality of the data from some of the operators. What we have done is there's a software system that's been introduced and more of the operators are using that, so that's helping to address some of that issue. And we're also proposing to carry out audits later in the year, and that's more about just checking the purpose of the trip, etc., and that is entirely eligible for the funding. So, you know, things are moving on that, and we're working with the operators to try and improve that position so that we can move to year on year, the latest year's data. At the moment, we've still used the original year's data of 2015. The amount paid for management costs has come down over the years. It was started at, we capped it at 25%, went down to 20%, and it's now at 15%. And we are continually working with the operators to make them as efficient as possible in that respect, so you know that they have enough money to both manage their operation and deliver it. In terms of feedback, we participate, and there's a quarterly Community Transport Federation meeting, and we participate in that to discuss with the operators any issues they've got that are coming up. And in paragraph 15 of the report, there's the key themes that come up from the operators, and primarily they are around certainty and security of future funding. And part of that is an issue with the CCGs, who provide overall, it's not a massive amount, but it still is a chunk of the funding, 63,000 a year for those hospital trips. They're ones that are done under, it's called Section 256. And Every year we do struggle to get confirmation in future years that that funding's coming. So that type of thing is what, you know, concerns the operators quite understandably. Just one other thing that I would highlight to you is about permitting arrangements. There has been for probably a year, 18 months, there have been concern that there was proposals. Community transport operators are primarily operate on a not-for-profit basis. However, under a Section 19 or 22 permit, they can actually tender for commercial work, and a lot of those operators do that. And as you can imagine, that helps with their overall running cost and their viability. There was a proposal from government that community transport operators would no longer be allowed to operate under Section 19 or 22 permits. However, there was a judicial review on that, and that was, you know, that's no longer going forward. So the previous or the existing scenario that they can actually tender for commercial work still continues, which has taken away a lot of uncertainty for some operators. And there was a concern nationally that many community transport operators, which we know provide a vital service in our more rural communities, you know, that took away that worry then, because that has been challenged and is no longer going forward. I thought I'd mention in terms of users and feedback coming through that regular meeting, we haven't had anything negative coming back from the users, and it's something that we do discuss at those meetings, so that's a positive thing. We do every so often, however, get from the operators they would like to see a review of the funding arrangements. Now, we have tried that on a number of occasions, and we have looked at it again more recently. However, there isn't any other funding arrangement that we can get them to agree to. If it suits one operator, it doesn't suit another. So at the moment, we're proposing to maintain the existing funding arrangements in the way we allocate and apportion that funding pot, because it's been in use for a number of years. The operators, some may like it, some may not, but actually they understand it. And, you know, to be honest, the operations themselves are still viable and going. So we propose to continue with the existing mechanism for the future years at this point in time. I mentioned about the CCGs and their payment, and we'll continue to work to try and press them to give greater certainty about that ongoing funding, because it is a worry in that sector. Just my final points then. We've continued to support the 13 operators across the county. We haven't had negative feedback. We are working to improve the quality of data we get out of it, so we can be a bit more accurate with the funding apportionment and support them in their operations. And we'll see what comes out of the audits later in the year and what actions we might want to put in to further support them in that. I'll conclude there on that.
Thank you, and a good report. I've got no questions, so we'll move on. I'm looking at the board here. It's a good report. We know transport is a major issue, but what we're just coming through. Bill, are you there? Bill's typing a message. Yes. Over to you, Bill.
In the report, it says one of the CCGs has not only paid for 9 months, not 12 months. Have we got all the money from them yet?
Well, you know what CCGs can be like, Bill. What's the answer to that?
That's why I'm asking the question.
No, we're continuing to press for that. That was tied up. They were doing a wider review of various grants they pay, so it was linked into a wider piece of work the CCG was undertaking, and we're still pressing for that.
So we'll follow it through, Bill. Happy with that? Okay, we will move on.
All we can do is ask and push them for it. Actually, unfortunately, I can't make them give the money over. But yes, we're having those ongoing conversations to push for that.
Well, if it's part of a contract, they're not fulfilling their part of the contract if they're not paying the money over, are they?
It's not actually a contract, it's a grant that comes to them. That they passport onto the community transport operators. So no, it's not a contract.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bill. That's sometimes a problem with grants. They're not contracts and they're hard to follow up. Okay, I'm just checking. We've no more questions. Let's go on to I think we're on to the final agenda item. And I know somebody in our group, we're very excited to this. Restoring the Railway Ideas Fund, Leicester to Burton line. And I think we've already got a question from David. So over to you, Anne. It's quite exciting, this, but we just need some feedback. I think Ian or Anne can answer this. Thank you.
I'll take that if that's all right, Chair. Just a very quick verbal update from us. It's just there was positive news from government who have awarded Krill, which is the campaign to reopen the Ivanhoe line, the Leicester to Burton line, who have awarded Krill some development funding for looking at the case to reopen that line. We are awaiting further detail, as are Krill, I understand, but just to emphasise that the money is about building the business case, or doing the business case, to understand the robustness of the case and the viability of reopening that line. It's not actually for delivering it or any works, it's about establishing the case. Now, what we understand is DFT have advised Krill not to undertake any work or action on that yet, but they will be having some conversations with them in the next few weeks to elaborate on the next steps around that. But overall, a positive piece of news about that funding on that campaign.
Thank you. And are you standing up for this one then, David?
Yes. Thanks, Alan.
Well, you've been going on a long time, and it's I know it's close to your heart, so your perseverance is wonderful. Carry on.
Okay, no, this takes us back to the 1980s. And I think I'm the last person around who was part of it, but at that time, the county council was a different animal altogether. We invested in a tremendous amount of infrastructure, bypasses, the new roads all over the place, the airport. We were responsible for putting a massive amount of cash into that, the National Forest, of course, and railways. We actually, in fact, did open the first part of Ivanhoe, which runs from Leicester to Syston, and as far as I'm aware, that's been a success. But we weren't allowed to open the next stage, which was Leicester to Burton, because privatisation came along and the costs then span out of control. But somewhere in Anne Carruthers' office, in a cupboard somewhere, are all the plans that were set out, and these were most detailed plans about how not only would the line operate, but how the stations would be rebuilt. And we spent years, probably too long, in looking at the details, but it's all there, and it only has to be fetched out of the archives, and let's hope we can actually get this underway again. So I do wish everybody involved in this project well, and I hope that the County Council will continue to give it all the support it can. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I can hear the passion in your voice. I love it. Anne, you got a job to look through some boxes there in the office and the archives. I've got no comments on the board, so I'll just sum up. First of all, the date of the next meeting will be September the 3rd. It seems a long way away. Hopefully we'll be able to do that in person. Things should have changed by then. I'd like to take this opportunity, first of all, to thank all the members for attending and for the questions. I'd like to thank all the officers for making this available and for the fantastic reports. I'd like to thank Graham for the guest speaker, another fantastic report, which was very in-depth, and I'm sure there'll be more to come. And finally, to the public that are watching, I think it's on YouTube, this is transparency at its best. You can watch live Scrutiny and see how we work, and we're always looking forward to your comments. So I'd like to thank everybody for their attendance, comments. Be safe and be sensible, and we look forward to meeting you all again soon. Take care.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, everybody.
Well done.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you.